The Zoom isn't letting Tony join, but he should be in like a minute at most.
I gave this disclaimer last debate, and I don't think it ended up being a problem, but I'm having like Wi-Fi issues in my region, so it might cut out for parts of the 1AC. Like, I'll go to a different location for the 1AR where the Wi-Fi will be better, but for the sake of the 1AC, I'm just going to stay here.
The reason it's not letting Tony join is because he was joined on browser because we were in a different. Oh, Tony, you should be able to join now. It like takes a while to let him leave the Zoom so he can rejoin it. It's weird.
Sorry about that.
What I see should be sent. Let me know when you all have it. Does everybody have the 1AC? Okay. I'm going to start in about 10 or so seconds unless somebody verbally objects. Contention one is please the current plea bargaining regime is one of states founded in violence, prosecutorial discretion, and lack of judicial review, systematic inequalities are predisposed to dismiss criticisms of it, so you should presume the status quo is guilty until proven innocent. That's gotcha. And 16 plea bargaining give rise to incarceration, military contributor mass incarceration takes place in which judicial review, prosecutors did not limited discretion, rather the result of negotiation, prosecutors let them broad discretion laws, discriminatory application to perpetuate systematic inequality and justice are combined with the defendants for plea bargaining, so numbers who subconsciously practice let it be predisposed to dismiss criticism of peace, sanitize the violence, incarceration, state-sponsored oppression, utilitarian calculations, absent considerations of plea bargaining are ethically indefensible, logically inconsistent, and prop up institutional racism, reject that sanitization, thus culture. Necessarily properly invoke util sanitation, minimize the pain, sanitize to serve your conversation, to comparison, this approach is advise the author to identify the value because it is possible. More logically indefensible comparative inquiries require not to weigh advantages and disadvantages of the case of the choice is good because less plea bargaining justified in civil batch plea bargaining obfuscates violence from CF from public use and seals evidence and discrimination because prosecutors offer deals without video reduction of plea bargaining disruption, cold institutional racism was to produce serious views about criminalized behavior. Insidious. The plan sells by eliminating prosecutorial discretion and sentencing that causes meaningful sentencing. 19. 97% of federal defendants are sentenced to plea bargaining in the CJS to the prosecution to push for heavy penalties. Many defendants plead guilty, except harsher penalties. Minority groups are dealt with harshly. There's no need to reform. There's need to reform. This requires the influence to be removed from prosecutors and allocated sentencing judges who have no objective role in sentencing would be enhanced if there is a discount for defendants. The size would be determined by the judge. A large discussion apply in circuits with prosecution cases weak. The plan spills over to coercion and barter justice and leads to the dismissal of the weakest cases as COVID and plea bargaining be eliminated by facing the size of the limitation on prosecutors' discretion to offer large guilty discounts and reduce the oversight and offenders defendants plea discounts to provide prosecutors offering large discounts so large and dissonant courts completely because discounts limits prosecutors' ability to resist weak cases discounts and directly impact procedural screening practices and creating incentives to weak cases discounts reduce incentives to overcharge availability leverage obtained through overcharging discounts are available to every defendant. Contention 2 is DI status quo state courts the decisions freeze legislative dynamic incorporation of federal law. That's law C and 16 state constitution present a barrier to the incorporation to dynamic federal law. State courts freeze state incorporation. This resistance storm against importing dynamic federal state legislative adoption depends on state courts to adopt federal standards. Such an approach prevents an opportunity for states to enhance federal institutional design and judicial review powers. Incorporation that's reverse causal engaging state courts unlocks and legitimizes dynamic incorporation. That's Rossi and 16 state court assessment would have an immediate little effect on incorporation with federal courts of controlling interpretation does not leave the state. The option would be relatively involving state courts benefits federalism engaging in review. State courts should not be limited to bystanders and play a role in legitimately dynamic federal review. State court review should be recognized under federal law. This federalism would shift the role of state courts from using non-delegation to pose a norm against state incorporation. Federalism would engage state courts to raise states experiment with incorporation by contrast to traditional courts for federal courts possessing a monopoly to relegate states to the bystander role rather than active participant. Dialogue over procedural is necessary. They have an outsized impact on the states since in brought out. Anything they should have institutionalized role in federal procedure input would improve roles. Public comments are not sufficient. There are reasons to worry about procedures outliers and changes in some widespread effects on states and current norms. Federal procedure no way to account for effects. Federalism comes to the state should not be either part not necessary to accept states' ultimate position. There's relationship between states and the bed in the area procedures mediated by federalism. Federalism need bargaining procedural rules, but there is zero risk of state capture. This in Brano in 18. Concerns about politicization capture should be moderated. Each steps ensures subsumed through the whole states and first view diverse or partisan concerns because there are plaintiffs and defendants. Federal policymakers cannot should ignore states are incentivized and improved not to weaken the states are willing to participate in federal procedure in the system defending federalism, computer conservative preference, and liberals' commitment to court access to bipartisan solution concerning the argument that articles permitting without this procedural decision can be overturned. Dynamic incorporation needs to be applied in criminal law, necessary to solve broader discriminatory enforcement and forum shopping. The divine 20 scholarship is nearly over because the DI federalism and criminal law. DI is relevant, rare, and federal criminal law. DI stands for national federalism. DI reform criminal law reduces the inertia that needs reforming political incentives favoring towards more laws, making it difficult to update incorporation-based level political opposition because regional fair building is less likely to inconvenience stakeholders. Conflict between state and federal rule of law. DI can strengthen SOP by providing the state with a greater opportunity to exercise oversight. Local police influence federal prosecutors and made state law. Local police as a form information gatekeepers. Police avoid defendant fancy sentencing and procedure by shifting forward shopping with no accountability by creating independent CIO opens the opportunity for legislatures to oversee DI. This is the most potent tool of modern federalism where Congress expands federal criminal laws and increase the role of law enforcement. Those gathering its information gatekeepers. The scarcity of DI is not due to any determination that DI would not serve its purposes. It also improves upon the outdated model of vertical federal state interactions that voice their impact turns that's divine. In 20 DI is the tool of federalism. CI entails both projects of both federal and state to implement national federalism. Traditional federalism focus on monitoring this outdated federalism should focus on how governments really exercise authority. States exercise influence by implementing federal decentralization. Advance aims to defend decentralization not need to be about the state's decentralization to stand the leverage points first incorporating state officials necessary for administrative reasons. Having infrastructure is sufficient. Second, eliminate political barriers. Politicians elected by state constituents are more likely to support program if it delivers federal dollars. Opposition people are more willing to accept policy when neighbors have it, allowing application of law to various changes in norms. Easier for federal actors to nationalize it when states policy does mimic the do not state rights because state participation comes only with consent. Applying TI to criminal laws, modern federalism solves innovation. GC and safety while innovation remains critical. Federal preemption side by states effort federalism improve dynamic enough to keep America at the forefront. Economic ability of our government to respond to fire erosion of federal state partnership as way. This federalism is federal decision makers work with the state solves extinction that shows and 16 IT is essential for talent where we stand trust humans in the ecosystem to actually wipe out with the ecosystem of making a saving power to IT without IT we cannot solve environmental economies. IT is liable to unexpected failures, so IT must be handled carefully. Choose a modern control humanization, the tendency to produce unintended side effects, creating the ecosystem with resources. IT is our only means to determine if any species liable to species we cannot deal with the environment. That model of influence is key to self. In 1917, state government shaped federal policy through implementing laws to affect distribution of power with implementation of policy to push back against the federal scheme to make it stronger than more the state governments and its efforts to mitigate climate change. The more the U.S. addresses that problem of extinction, that's NG. In 19, climate change causing global extinction is possible due to cascading effects of people outside of the European motivation collapse caused to post out of P532 survivability and maintain the adaptation limited sea stress rendered uninhabitable, making extinction a modern assessment how extinction probably started successfully with only 1% extinction. The whole world's more probably important by trillion times. Thus, the plan, the United States federal government should enact substantial criminal justice reform and sentencing by enacting through dynamic incorporation of pursuant to inherent judicial authority, local rules of procedure that grant federal sentencing judges sole authority to issue sentencing discounts following criminal plea-bargains. Contention 3, solvency. The level of the judiciary matters in the context of CJR. Pleas are non-appealable. Local flexibility is essential. Thus, Roth enacting district court activism is valuable through extrajudicial speech and quasi-legislative activity within the criminal justice. District courts are better situated. The majority of cases resolved by a plea trial judge is likely to glean information about issues with the local judge. Many cases never heard any appeal charges when they interact with the vice even when appeal reviews limited charges are not for the committee over to the presiding or abuse just empowered to other institutional actors likely to do so. Judicial activism achieving equal reform, local rules teaching practice, providing criminal defendants discovery, local diversity and preference have benefited hundreds. District courts have inherent powers to create internal procedural rules separate from any congressional grant, but those powers are quasi-legislative. That's the nutty. 12 federal courts have inherent rulemaking powers to control their process. Federal courts have a variety of powers inherent including the power to sanction and promulgate internal procedural rules. The court has upheld the authority of district courts to promulgate local rules. Judicial power from the legislative-like authority. Amending the federal rules of criminal procedure is not necessary. That no leads or dissents, but takes out linking in criminal rules of procedure, which are increasing now. That's Rob. 19 district court activism becomes an intrajudicial mechanism. Your trials who participate in local rules more demanding than the federal rules. District courts have local regarding discovery what happens to be increasing even when districts where the entire court is not adoptable. Individual judges solve and amends his order during plea negotiations. Judicial bench book provides district judges supervisory authority to enact to dictate by local rule. Enacting is established by legal act, which includes court enacted local rules. That's right. 13 plain meaning of enact is also limited. Enact is established by legal act and not defined to unique legislatures. Courts commonly refer to court enactors rules and plethora of examples indicates that courts have not restricted enacted legislature. Similarly, legislative enactment core rules have the force of law and is being watchable from legislative laws. Local rules have the force of law. Law means nothing more than statutes and includes rules. Drew, I have 30 seconds. Drew? I can't hear you. Okay. Give me a second to sit down. I can hear you now, yeah. When you sit down, then I'm good. Okay.
Okay. So first, how does granting federal sentencing judges sole authority to issue sentencing discounts spill over for dynamic incorporation?
Yeah, so there's 3 internal links. The first is that the reason that state courts are currently so like states are trying to dynamically incorporate now, but state courts are blocking those efforts because they don't feel like they're involved in the process. The app would involve state courts in the process, which by necessity would like reduce their conflicts.
Wait,
But we have reasons for why.
How does the app involve state courts in the process?
Because that's what dynamic incorporation is. District judges would work with state courts to come up with these like discount policies in each region. That's what the app is.
But the app only grants federal sentencing judges new authority to issue sentencing discounts. How does that enable?
And look at the plan text. It says that should through dynamic incorporation. That's what that part means.
Oh, so it like has it like, so you fiat like, or I guess you don't fiat, but has state court judges like, well, they're
Yeah, so the
like,
process would be like district court judge calls up state court judge. It's like, hey, let's get together to figure out what like sentencing discount we want to make. They might decide to like give a sentencing discount of a max of like 10 years for this. They might decide to like make X condition like a big deal in their region, like things like that.
Is that like an outcome or part of the process of the plan?
The plan fiats that they like adopt discounts, but it does not mandate what each discount the region decides is. That's where the dynamic incorporation and the corporation between the state and district courts decides what discount they would adopt. Gotcha. But they are mandated to adopt some sort of plea bargaining discount system.
Okay. And it's not a uniform rule, it's local rules?
I don't know what you think the distinction is, but instead of like district courts have the authority to do local rules of procedure via inherent authority, because if they couldn't make local rules of procedure for themselves, there would be no way for them to function. Well, so it's not reliant on the REA.
Okay, gotcha. The advantage, what about dynamic incorporation? Okay, so I'm confused how dynamic incorporation for sentencing procedure spills over to criminal law.
Yeah, so first is that state courts I explained to you, but the more generic thing is like it doesn't need to spill over to criminal law writ large. We have 2 arguments. The first is that the Zambrano card, which says that dialogue over rules of procedure is uniquely necessary because those implicate the states most. But the criminal law argument just says that DI should start to be applied more in criminal law. The reason that would expand post-AF is the state courts argument. Like states are trying to do it now, but the reason they can't is because state courts are objecting. The AF via doing it over rules of procedure and giving state courts a voice means that they allow those sorts of, they stop challenging those things that are happening now.
I'm just going to use the rest for even that's like 15 seconds.
Okay.
Ten. Starting now. 552.
It's sent. Let me write that down. All right. It is 10 off, then the first advantage, then the second advantage. All right, can I get a thumbs up when people are good?
I need a minute.
Okay.
All right, I'm ready.
First up on the skills outside better hurts prevent from developing new strategy forces to rely on generics with shallow argumentation, but each for deterrence, but back to the scenario, you don't put on theories since they're shifted. These side buys too far. Next up, catapult the United States federal government ought to submit and acting through dynamic incorporation and pursuant to inherent judicial authority, local procedures grant federal sentencing judges sole authority to issue sentencing discounts following criminal plea bargains to an algorithmic impact assessment process conducted by an independent oversight by the United States federal government not to enact through dynamic incorporation pursuant to inherent judicial authority, local procedures grant federal sentencing judges sole authority to issue sentencing discounts following people of criminal plea bargains less recommended by the oversight by the 2EC must theoretically justify permanent and provide text, otherwise sustained back to the debate to the final rebuttals for testing flip-sitting theory arguments that make self CFSA and I 18% assessment of use to determine appropriate portable ensure kind of providing research assessments increase activities and ensure the public gets responded with ensure the public list describe system public notice and common law particular public concerns that acceptable to be ongoing agencies committee accountability increase capacity understanding facts that was benefit for transfer to public territory request system that oversight is become a jackpot for the public affairs who kids agents failed and unaccountable criminal justice weighs everything this horrible and bad birds of 19 somewhere things take complex assistant that immigrants made the national substitution climate that's all quest for crime for series where pressure matters the teacher did events of compensation or machines the precursor to dystopian monitoring next up public estimates from the whole area 1 in that's where words and phrases 8 and should be the 2 that's what's different but used before not to give reference to groups all 3 1 that's Brockwood's and what is indivisible quantity kind of for limits to topics large in history and all these are too broad sweeping form next up criminal justice title 18 this just the 18 criminal justice at the federal limits of all series were coming to the criminal laws 1 title 2 US code violation they are and voting shameful misconduct scored the court by controversy martial forms 2 criminal law the next up enacted has to be Congress's permanent and 94 enactments such as constitutional action is different the act of an act passable but that's something an act of law or started an act to find to make it to perform the best act of legislation vote neg 1 limits regard any interpretation of actions including rules that are prescribed by the court makes the term meaningless which directs the link to generic sense assumes structural from this McMurdy to McMurdy 2020 empty argument we're going to enact it on when those were referenced only but about it in the course of the authority adopt is not limited course make law through the adopting rules terms and adopt must be read to contemplate different things or be rendered superfluous to precision the Daniels and the enactors were referred to means but has passed in the present signs independently not specifying your agent is a voting issue misquoted by controversy of agent-based space was less than out of our offense but neg on presumptive because UFG is not an actor next up the United States Congress ought to establish civilian advisor groups in the district courts with the authority to develop local rules consistent with the goal of acting through dynamic incorporation pursuant to inherent judicial authority local rules of procedure grant federal sentencing judges sole authority to issue sentencing discounts following criminal plea bargains require the use district courts to implement the best identified practices of the cattle plan solves without wasting judicial resources in committees as Johnson 3 improving the efficiency and speed of federal courts dispute of central rulemaking processes the centerpiece which a district advisor groups does just to accomplish the goal that the devil's rulemaking thought to uniformly already has not Congress and provides the rulemaking process of which the judicial branch emphasis rulemaking uniformity maintaining authority over the procedure authority title for all independence of the judiciary and the Judiciary is pushing for expansion now, but sustained lobbying is key. That's key to solve clog the times to Congress to expand, but lower cost describing the stomach case listen for the public a bit of litigation justice not the last federal judgeships when asked about the best address cases of from the law lobby could expand the long delays and litigants for the delay in court this little version that trust and the judiciary groups out of the country existing efforts has been lower circumstances the understaffed judiciary is a crisis in the maker courts cannot provide justice in this country specific number judges cannot accept justice with justice and equality and conference injustice system. The plan hurts judiciary's legislative agenda that's used on advantage from adopting the proposal reform consequence of the system to determine the time for very considerable significantly substantial judicial conference of parts of involving the politics ruling by taking out judges and underground work will govern Congress because the product will meet and will not agree with the towards the federal judicial failures across the transparency competition related at the judiciary sometimes necessary for the judiciary crossroads with Congress or the executive minimize these occurrences that are irritation to draft rules lawyers will move the slated to congressional will move judges move the judiciary from clutch of the Congress taking the more procedural rules making world restriction of the Congress court club prevents COVID recovery that's going to adult 20 and then in the wake of the COVID the potential legal so the system we need to deal with the sort of financial disruption of the debates to be liquid reorders manipulation downsides are acquired the support of the courts and the government certified evidence in the current environment potential solutions to the capable court contestant rapid recovery polls use ahead of this kind of crisis has put a potential permanently reconstruct the global tendencies in the global support economic level of the strength to combating extremism in China long-term government to change the principle of democracy with authoritarianism coronavirus alter the balance of economic software use and armament have the businesses to teach cats pros as stimulus rapid recovery very well effective growth strategy that solves every impact that brands 18 Americans come to overwhelming power performance these many global power harbor dominance constitutes hard power background inverting unstable multiple suppressing risk profession and terrorism what opportunity capital currency whatever lens some important cards go on to for capital China single Japanese gives need to perpetuate over much next off the Supreme Court of the United States shall rule the not enacting through dynamic incorporation pursuant to inherent judicial authority look the procedure to the federal sentencing judge's sole authority to issue sentencing distance on a follow from criminal plea bargains violence custom insurance outlining the initial covenant civil and political rights next up, Republican obstructionism calls a dem filibuster reform that's living in every 30 developers and purchase for New York organizing the filibuster keeping the filibuster for consistent to pass fully flowing party lines only take advantage one more time on the vote game in town mark that bipartisan game in town and handling election from loss and GP party single control this button can't campaign filibuster voter suppression last year but for reps are getting Congress and lots across the budget competitive and Republicans consent initial voting state to bar automatic petition job place that officer federal even the decades for the future Democrats with non-forgiving equation fleeting wheel lasting consequences for leadership causes political populism that's abuse champs of the revolution parties radical obstructions anti-democratic agendas that government dysfunction decrease threats support for authorized ideas had official confidence and endorsements for French to protect white political power to populism but they get back taxes for a Christian world less such a string of less popular forgive advantages in an electoral culture you can't win a majority in the system the populism causes 16 to wall 16 but for populism fail early and picking the liberal states during the liberalism and middle oriented torture rearming taking unilateral military action threatening within the governments of their reaction populism resumes warrant of activity trade with territory to seal the bill multi seeking negotiation politics capital populism tariff costs and levels and merchant China Turkey bringing for themselves stupid where when they fell on the importance of maintaining public including the future plan remain evergreen the next off the text pursuant article 5 the constitution called limited constitution conventionally forces state to ratify constitutional amendment that enacts you dynamic incorporation pursuant to inherent judicial authority local rules of procedure the grand federal sentencing judges sole authority to choose sentencing discounts following criminal plea bargains the first advantage first calculus properly attempts managed to cognitive biases for negative threats are choose the time Armstrong 15 verse of the property attempts and global percent of identified size and some process reports and process and but understanding that the risk critical more sustainable development distribution impacts on why governance specific breathing for all of infinite impacts cultural reference to infinite impacts for infinite different infinite impacts impact infinite negative from ethical perspective no positive gain can outweigh mark that a positive gain can outweigh the other advantage extinction no warming effect this work was 70% likely level of the realm unlike the constitution extension some of the profit extreme when 12 to the planet and have to have some the team to extinction even in extreme scenarios mark that extreme scenarios no innovation impacting never sudden 70 sample application demonstrating inherent child limited to text but difference one for things catechism text or struggle to prevent terrorism capitalism underlying competitive non-proliferation every level in playing with the tech power resisting through adopting military affairs mark that at military affairs all causes to the advantage. 1, no evidence judicial reviews more for than prosecution. 2, no warrant that wide spills of other pretrial factors still doesn't solve things like unpayable bail and threats which result in plea bargaining inevitably.
Okay, are you good?
Sorry, did you say something?
Yeah, I said, are you good?
Yes.
Okay. Which ones did you not read?
I did not read reverse spending, and I didn't read the internal on CIL.
Okay, so what's the net benefit to CIL?
Politics.
What's okay. Can you explain the link in the context of like local rules of procedure to me?
Yeah. So, in order for like rules of procedure to be passed, or like different changes in the rules, Congress has to vote on them. We'll argue that
About
perception
the REA, the app happens via inherent authority. Why does Congress have to review the app?
I mean, I guess you can make that argument. We'll argue that Congress, in order to be topical, like you kind of have to use Congress.
Can you draw the internal? Okay, so if we're the courts, we don't link to the DISAD?
No. You need to have congressional approval. Also, we can make the argument that just like perception of coordination, perception of agreement within like the current state of politicization in Congress,
No, I
that
still
would also
understand
link
why
to
the
this.
app would thwart that, but that's okay. I want to talk about the civilian advisory groups counterplan. So all of these cards are like these advisory groups being created is like, can you explain the internal link to court clock to me, simply put?
Yeah. So the argument, so it's like a counterplan that we can go, but it's with it, but it's mostly just the DISAD. The DISAD, it's basically a judicial PC DISAD, i.e.,
Okay.
the judges are lobbying the courts in the status quo to try and get like more people in the judiciary, which would solve court clog. But the plan requires them to focus on the plan instead, which means they can't get that. And like,
Wait, this is about like circuit court judges, not district court judges. I don't understand why
I don't
like
understand
a
why
fiated
those are
enacted
different.
rule of procedure would like.
I mean, we'll make
So-
arguments that even though
I
the
guess
plan is
why?
fiated, it
What
still has
card
to,
have you
like,
read that says
follow
that it would
safety.
trade off with those efforts? This card that like says spillover is from 1998.
So first I would argue that just like the politics, or not like politics as an ideology, but politics as in like mechanics of how things operate in terms of political capital have not really changed all that much. But the card talks about like justices' involvement in the process of rulemaking. They're like
This is like
involved in
the
rule drafting.
scarce time of judges, right? If you're right that judges want new like judges
we'll
in
argue
the
they
board,
have to
why
push the
wouldn't they?
plan. They have to push the plan. It's a politics dissent, but to court enacted rule laughs.
Okay, but I don't understand what the link of it. Okay, the impact to it is about like, sorry, my word doc is frozen. The impact to it is about this sort of like, okay, the Greenwood card is from like decades ago, from like a BYU like Mormon study. Like, why does what's the internal
Sure.
link between court clog and like stopping COVID issues?
So I'll argue that in order to deal with all of kind of like the issues that come after COVID and all of the
What
like
issues?
new court cases, it cites bankruptcy, it cites like things need to be liquidated or reorganized. All of those require court involvement.
Prep. Okay, 6:34. I'll send it out. Should be sent. I'll wait a minute to give an order. Okay, I'll give the order now then. It's the please advantage, the dynamic incorporation advantage, NeoAF SPAD, T subsets, T criminal law, T enact, the AI impact assessment counterplan, the Congress counterplan, like the advisory groups counterplan, the customary international law counterplan, CON, and then the filibuster DA. Does anyone need that again? Okay, presuming that it's no, so I'll start in about 10 seconds, so verbally object if you're not ready. Plea bargaining outweighs possible distractions, the best massive mission millions perpetuate systematic inequality, and countless thousands refuse utility framing practice. Ongoing violence, utilitarianism is not objective, but instead mathematical whitewash that conceals, justifies, and props up institutional racism. Any action could cause attention, which is logically incoherent and perpetuates anti-black violence as gotcha. It's not consequentialism, but instead reproduction of ongoing racial violence. The DI advantage. Incorporation of state courts of federal procedure, reinvigorates dynamic incorporation, updates federal state interactions, and solves innovation, warming causes, decisions, loss mitigation, adaptation, resource, runaway emissions, residual skill, diversity, and agriculture activity, ensures endless feedback loops. The Constitution, this idea that referencing like scientific and empirical research and positive feedback loops outweighs irreversible and could value of future lives. McDonald, in a denuclearization that result in a little loss of like winter based on shaky science and reliable model determining McDonald's would making 66 nations somebody detonated 2,476 new 75 undercover war, even nuclear war, even recover runaway climate change, nuclear war is not inevitable extinction, but runaway warming is tech innovation solves extinction, allows us to predict and respond to multiple existential events, asteroids could destroy humans and ecosystems, environmental conflicts might cascade, and unregulated technology might produce unintended consequences that shall know all causes and spills over to DI broadly rules cooperation disperse stakeholder buy-in and CGR sends a key signal because this large area of cooperation that's 20C raw season borrow and divine the US bad stuff disclosure undermines critical thinking about removing incentives to innovate makes debate sale and worse they're often solved by future disclosure doesn't justify cheating because for T you should have had an egg anyways T subsets 1 we impose a wholesale requirement of sensing discount plain text and vacuum is least arbitrary 2 counter-interpret means within author article 52 the word in within limit obviously word is enemy throughout we're not aware of any 30 conversation word to the word in the words and phrases 98 action against independent establishment executive branch and action against federal government we meet in we're in one of the areas 3 preferred A over limiting absolute reform sizing processes or core topic including algorithms and mandatory minimum source topic education and innovation B Afghan process-based apps include every crime without defense which one means a loose to big C arbitrariness the rest is in which filters out the ways no evidence is an intent to define or exclude which stifles research harms off innovation functional limits abolition clemency states or all hurdles reasonability competing in terms crushes predictability by arbitrarily limiting out the research ex post C criminal law 1 we meet plain text CGR 2 criminal justice versus police courts and correctional institutions distinct from criminal law Bernard 8 criminal justice study of police courts and correctional institutions distinct from law which defines behaviors prohibited and punishable under law CGR must reduce incarceration regard and ID reform when it comes to criminal justice everyone agrees in the Constitution reduction number of incarcerated people 3 preferred A over precision Bernard cites legal consistency specifically indicts or interprets conflating criminal justice and criminal law always because like guys predictability there evidence only includes criminal law prefer intent to define exclude prefer contextual list crossbow 18 the criminal justice system is one of the police criminal proceedings mechanism bargaining power is deployed this opens the criminal justice reform C over limiting its use also statistical habeas and digital searches D neg ground only Congress can create new crimes new criminal laws moves neg engagement functional limits and libase you can crossify also reasonability you can crossify T enact 1 we meet A plaintext as an act teacher enact in USFG plaintext is the most objective B district judges enact local rules to reform criminal law by Connie and 70 district judges chosen to reform through local procedures district judges enact local criminal rules 2 counter interpretation act means established by legal acts includes court enacted local rules but excludes judicial rulings that's 20C right 3 preferred A predictability right sides the consensus of court decisions specifically indicts that interprets inflating rulings and rules which are inherent legislative authority that always because legalized prep or counter interpret only RF should solve Article 3 powers concur 93 the federal courts have authority to enact rules under Article 3 the federal courts have this inherent power comports of plain meaning that's best below pairs 19 only words of no plain meaning the court may describe technical meaning courts describe plain meaning dictionary common understanding of actions make it actions statute enact to make a law is rules of conduct enact and is measure that is binding and enforceable that comes to rule any other understanding of technical understanding violation constitutional independence meaning is understood by legislators seeks to impose highly legalistic meaning on the commonly understood enact one. Enact only means legislators v. Res context. The rest is use of and that is not defining enact CGR. Northwestern RV 1921 Act is used in a particular definitions of the relation act and all entirely different question. What do you present in courts? Create rule of law. C. After limiting gaps to Congress ensures a slew of process counterplays unbeatable, involves every debate into course of politics, makes staff writing impossible, and produces a contrived debate. C. Academics based courts teach complex legal question and tries hard to teach learn to bastardize topic controversy for no offense. A. There's a finite number of advocates and tons of courts and nice. B. Courts counterplay non-unique research burden. C. Reason voting anything else causes substance crowd. A. Specs bad, regressive, non-resolutional, and unpredictable cross checks and reasonability applies. USFG is an actor, no presumption. A. I counterplan perm to both, perm to the counterplan, perm to the aff, and the counterplan on different CGR issue. Counterplan seems to be textually and functionally competitive. Otherwise, they take on arbitrary net benefits to beat any aff, perm to the aff, and the counterplan on different issue doesn't have to spec into 2AC non-resolution on neg bias because the block I inserted the counterplan text as well doesn't solve one states. They won't trust the counterplan. Any chance that it doesn't result in cooperation makes states feel left out and precludes bargaining. 2. Delay results in even more prisoners being sentenced pursuant to a coerced plea bargaining. 3. Doesn't solve judicial independence. Essential courts will refuse to implement Blasey 11 Christian rules of the independence judiciary. The courts have certain power to protect the independence congressional rules infringe on the judicial independence not necessary proper the legislative authority of affair administration and justice order of the judicial power clause guarantees and judiciary. 4. Judges will backlash any position hug. And 15. In allegation the court to calibrate the rule Congress above Congress intervenes intrusion chief into self-judiciary certainty justice of law to perpetuate Congress gun because of resistance and strong statement of judicial supremacy rather than shared responsibility. 5. Judicial independence of procedures necessary for rule of law. 18. Congress intervened in judicial procedures involving procedural matters continue lobbying by corporate entities for procedural reforms. Congress has rule of law. Congress releasing the batteries to turn all power struggle. Congress back and judicial power regarding procedure by Congress and the courts of rule of law. Corporate entities who shake justice for local individuals corporations have succeeded must be failure of judiciary preserve. The rule of the judicial rule goes back to the framing where judicial branch set apart as political process and contaminate rule of law might only utilize the structure as a question solves the extinction guard of 15 to clubs of the commissibility because extension the rule of law mechanisms facilitates mass observation the most purpose of the cooperative and utilize rule of law climate protection challenges climate change where habit actions of enormous impact with respect to climate stress we need global cooperation to accomplish cooperation rule of law no impact to AI code 19 code 17 we get carried with settlement and cheese party cards get monkey AI thank you the world's away over all the power of AI so map out all the place sentience feels and destruction really over as if you advance data flow orchestration there's no thought these pattern recognized networks not build up the Congress counterplan perm to the counterplan perm do both perm to the after the counterplan different issue perm to the after the counterplan different issue perm to the after and create the board district shorts are key one please they most knowledge about local factors that might affect please alternatives make it policies that cement inequality that's Roth 2 DI Roth 19 when district courts engage in rule making the most be careful not to overstep authority quasi legislative attacks undermine that translated legal chase really have debating genuine by all local actors based on responsibility to the facts caused by the courts will backlash cards court enacted rules Trump the counterplan means does nothing or gets circumvented of course by 18 the court enacted rules let Trump legislator enacted statutes more often not the procedures for tailgate non-statutory codes but in text enacted by the courts caused by the rule of law advantage agent counterplans are bad seals the content of the money sees anti-educational which shifting from action to actor no impacts in areas courts that have been clogged forever and they can just shift judicial resources anyways American military power is not necessary for global stability way 17 U.S. activities make security worse and effective spending have Japanese field to bring peace during the 90s to cut back on spending cause conflict decline this is not correlation with U.S. action systematic stability nothing U.S. says matters the world increase in balances slim people bring number one the big deadline for Shemitic theories are making the nation not build natives the U.S. just none of the illustrated the sheriff might be patrolling the neighborhood the rest of the world is getting alongside with the U.S. attempts to control the CIL counterplan perm to both perm to the counterplan the plan's not ruling so there's no ground system ever perm to the after the counterplan on different issue perm to the after the counterplan on different issue doesn't solve there's no customary international right to plea bargaining so this is incoherent perm to the after the process of the counterplan the fiat's the counterplan's entire process but implements the plan regardless of the counterplan they don't solve the net benefit one shot usage does not spill over 2 applying the process to where after incoherent after courts enact rules of law not broad judicial ruling so it's rarely used anyways the courts will backlash cross apply those cards. Yeah, that's fine. Condo is a voting issue for argument responsibility, lowers the bar for argument introduction, which privileges model data as the 2AC's best offense by preferring technical drops over clash and encouraging asinine counterplays. One condo solves the con counterplan perm to the counterplan perm to both. She also net benefit back in concert with the convention perm to the plan with the counterplays ratified kism. 5 ratification much longer 27 proposed and 1972 2 3 like to business gravity the issue links to net benefit because then result is requiring judges to grant sentencing discounts delay results in even more prisoners being sentenced to coercive plea bargaining cross by the court circumvention cards as well as the rule of law add on fiating limited cons voting issue VS out of all solvency deficits and is anti-educational but distorting the literature the filibuster DA I'm not spending much time here because this is ridiculous 1 no link to legislative changes don't happen immediately requires time and expansion so even dynamic incorporation doesn't trade off the DA 2 no link the plan creates rules pursuant to district court's inherent authority of a procedure it doesn't depend on congressional consent that's linearity 3 link turn A inertia increases the total number of stakeholders by including states which is likely to get legislative reform done B attitudes plan changes people's attitudes by CGR and makes it efficient reform 4 Trump thumps populism their evidence is really old and yeah let me grab a sip of water then I'll be good for class 6. Okay, I'm good.
Okay. Reasons to reject the team.
Conditionality, agent counterplans. I believe that was it.
Okay. I want to talk about the intrinsic perms on the advisory group's counterplan. Okay, so the first and the second perm, they're the same thing, right?
Ozzy, do you want to explain the distinction?
Give me 1 second to read them again. I think they're just intrinsic over different things.
They're
I think that's the
intrinsic
only
over
distinction.
different things. All right.
It's like do the counterplan on a different issue, and then the other one does the counterplan on a different issue. You know, they're both perm, do the app, and do the counterplan on a different issue. The issue is just different based off the perm.
Okay, I see. How does either of the perms, how do they solve the net benefit?
Ozzy, do you want to take this one as well?
Yeah. So they solve the net benefit because the net benefit for the impact assessment is premised off of like doing impact assessments for like policies. If it's premised off of like doing
Wait,
it for
no,
every
that's
policy,
not that counterplan. Different counterplan. The
The
advisory
perm-
group's counterplan with the like.
well then it's premised off like having the advisory group do the things. So it has them do. I don't
Okay,
understand what
perm
you're
did the
talking
F
about.
and create the board. How does that solve?
Because your argument is that the board is good, so let's just make it.
Right. District court's key. The plan implements it at the lowest level, and then if it's not possible at the lowest level, it does it at a higher level, or the counterplan does. Sorry. How does this apply to the counterplan?
You're referring to the advisory group counterplan again?
Yep.
So our argument is that when the judges themselves should be the one creating these local rules rather than having the advisor group develop the local rules with them, because the judges have the most expertise about plea bargaining and have because the district judges are the ones who are giving the plea bargains, so they internally know the most about the plea bargains.
What's the
They should
distinction
be in charge
between
of it.
judges themselves and judges and the advisory groups?
Wait, I think the better argument is just that it's about district and state court cooperation. State courts will feel cut out of the process and push back
The
to the
counterplan
bystander rule
uses
again.
state
If
courts.
because you've added a third
Again,
actor
yeah,
that has
the-
the end say.
The way
over
that
the
you solve the
product.
net benefit is having this advisor group overcharge their like boundaries and create the rules with them instead of having it just a joint cooperation between federal and state.
Right. This courts refuse to enforce the counterplan. How is the counterplan a procedural rule that infringes on the independence of the judiciary?
Because it's not what? So our argument is that when external forces try to impose rules onto the courts, it's likely that the courts will say that they have an inherent power to create their own rules, which supersede the rules created by the counterplan.
Okay. Sure. That's fine. We'll take prep for 10 seconds. Okay, 5:52. Starting now.
Dot prep 134. So let me save the doc. And my words. Oh, there we go. Cool. Okay, the order is going to be T enact, the AI counterplan, the con counterplan, the CIL counterplan, the filibuster disadd, the pleas advantage, the DI advantage.
Tony, I'm just gonna need a minute.
Yep.
Okay, I'm good now.
Cool. Sorry, let me. Okay. Topical affirmative supposed to Congress. There's two reasons to refer. First is precision. An act is the term of proper specific meaning when used in legal language. Other one-liner cards using enact and courts in the same tenses are a gross misinterpretation of the word enact. Our evidence makes a comprehensive legal consensus with intent to define and exclude. Second is ground. It's non-existent on this topic. There are zero unifying generics even within areas of the topic because of bidirectionality. The status quo is indefensible. The topic is massive and includes 4 previous topics, including immigration, surveillance, college legalization, etc., and including the court acted rules by judicial procedures. A one-way train to zero cost soft left half. They only have to answer the case, and so are not dissads. The court made rules. The first argument was plaintiffs in a vacuum. Topicality should be a referendum on 1AC internal links and how they explain the F and cross-X, because that is what determines pre-run preparation and 1AC strategy. 2 reasons to refer. First is to discourage just vague plaintext writing. Otherwise, there's an incentive for teams to read the resolution and shift their advocacy depending on what the negative says, which forces us to win T to get back to ground zero and then win substance, which time constraints make impossible. Plaintext vagueness is an independent voting issue. Refusal to specify make being negative impossible since no counterpoint would ever be competitive and no dissent whatever link. And the second is conditionality, letting them shift the actor after the 1AC happen. It kills debate, especially on a topic where the core topic controversy is over implementation. It lets them split the 1AC in half by requiring us to read dissads that obviously don't link as for the filibuster stuff, or to prove abuse, or committing to a strategy. But the 2AC can choose whether or not arguments are responsive. Are only off. The first argument was cross supply. Or for error negative, they get infinite preparation, get to choose language and solvency advocate. Siri checks against egregious picks out of normal means or other things depicted by the solvency advocate, even if they wouldn't hypothetically be combative. Cross supply, their argument that district courts are necessarily key from the other Congress counterplan disproves that they can't access the deficit. But if they win plaintiffs in a vacuum, you could vote negative on presumption. They just said the words that no presumption, which is not a complete argument. The USFG is not a complete actor and cannot implement the plan statute. But even then, the plaintiff says rules of procedure, which if they're right that it's an Article 3 power of the courts and Congress can statutory cannot enact or to get struck down by the courts. The first argument was the piece of evidence where this says courts can enact. This card has zero intent to define, just says the word enact rules in a sentence later, and the card says reform rules, and before it even says promulgate. The next evidence was the piece of right evidence. Reject right first. He's a JD candidate writing a paper arguing for a new interpretation of enact, obviously unpredictable. Second, right agrees our interpretation is legally true. His entire argument is this one instance should be an exception to the rule. Right 13, section 1612.1 provides enactment of a law typical understanding only legislative. The courts repeatedly interpret enact to mean legislative. See, the Secretary Department of Health, the court rule for LC partially be treated as a legislative enactment in the context of bar membership. Anticipates or legislative enactment is probably an interpretation for all, but its precisely should not be excluded judicial enactments. But that exception is legally wrong. The only time the California Supreme Court interpreted and enacted state law in section 1612.1, they concluded it has to be the legislative Supreme Court of California. 14, section 1612.1 reads the enactment of a state law, and Martinez versus Region and Court of Appeals opinion on Martinez is because the particular subsection reported state only for enactment of state law by the state legislature will meet the requirement, and right blows off the distinction between rules and laws. It's right 13, rules rather than laws is of little significance. Court rules have fuller surface of course law and are indistinguishable. Committee deciding black law notes the law means more than a statute. Rules of the courts are not laws and are not enacted. They're adopted. adopted by the court. Thus, Disha and 12 committee erroneously argued the court should its quasi-elective authority in effect enact law, a rule of court in petition to error which will affect the court does not enact laws court adopts rules of court. There's no internal link to precision from the right evidence. Writes both wrong and also cites negative court cases, which proves that there is not a single correct interpretation of enact, nor a consensus in the literature, but to any extent there is, they auto-lose if they don't answer the piece of Danielson evidence, which specifically says it's a term of art when used in explicit statutory context denoting legislative action. The next argument was counter-interpreted only if it's topical. This is arbitrary and self-serving, does not disprove our debatability offense, because our debatability offense proved we're sufficiently precise, but their interpretation completely skews the topic in favor of the AF. If we're winning over net grounds, it obviously disproves it. It's a question of competing interpretations where they could just say that about any specific forms of alternative. The next argument was the Article 3 courts. Again, this evidence has absolutely zero intent to define. They've chosen the part of the article that chooses to use the word enact. There are other parts of the article that says reform or other different language, which is not an interpretation card, because topicality is a question of competing interpretations, not a question of what language is used. Therefore, their interpretation of the word enact when used in different forms of statutory meaning, when used in this context, means that it can just, any AF could be functionally topical if they just have this card that says blank enacts, which is not a definition card. Topicality is a question of competing interpretation. This is not a plain meaning argument. The next argument was plain meaning. It was answered by the recuttings of the rules versus law distinction, which is the only interpretation argument that this card actually makes. It just says that the courts can enact rules in effect because they are laws, which is distinct. The next argument they made was resolutional context. The Northwestern evidence 1 does not have intent to define, only intending a specific usage of the word enact in a sentence. The synonym arguments of the 1AR would inevitably make us out of context. It says the legislator has power to enact laws or declare what law means. Courts also being able to declare law does not mean courts can enact. I'll insert this rehighlighting of the Northwestern evidence, but it's also misuse our evidence as enact as a word term of art with specific legal implications. Nearly all of our definitions cards are about enacting, not enacting law. The right evidence is also interpreting enact law, so they don't solve this offense, but we preempted it. It begs the question of what they're reforming. Our interpretation of criminal justice is limited to criminal law, which means you can only reform by changing the statutory law, which means they do not mean because they're in statutory reform of statutory got 16, but reform by the definition requires statutory changes. This next argument was, or I guess I'll do the other more precision stuff here. You can bring that back up to like the Article 3 stuff. Courts cannot enact rules first legally. The example gives are rules enacted under the Rules of Naming Act, which are rules promulgated by the court. The statute itself says the Supreme Court presides, not enact rules of procedures. Cavallaro 7 rules of criminal procedure enacted by the Congress or legislation. The Congress has to delegate authority to issue and enact rules of naming act, which are the Supreme Court shall the rules as well the power to prescribe rules of procedure. 828 USC to judicial conference determine the rules of evidence or procedural to have a conclusion. Provide evidence authority for promulgating draft rules. World Congress progress was to anticipate until enact into law the will intended the Supreme Court as advisory committee. This is not a small distinction because the Congress historically uses the word enact for legislative action. Other terms like regulate and adopt for non-legislative action. AS 18 enact for legislative action rather than judicial administrative action. Congress wants not to action only using language like adopt policies and act laws. Congress typically using language includes non-legislative action and especially provides no statement to enact, prescribe, issue, or enforce any law, including provisions having effective law against backdrop. A congressional requiring using the word enactment is the same to refer the statutes referring to enactment refer to action by the legislature. Second is separation of powers. Courts promulgate Noble 69. The legislature amended Rule 41E to increase that for taking action during proceedings of final termination. We recognize questions relative to the power of the legislature to enact changes to Article 3 providing for the SOP. Nothing more than legislative recognition of the court's power to promulgate rules of promulgating procedures. Third, comparatively, when the Congress is involved, they enact this is sign 8. Congress deferred enacting rules of evidence to enactment bypass a regular procedure. Court promulgate these rules and were likely against them. The F-ground argument is air negative because they have to prove our interpretation makes debate literally impossible, but it's empirically disproven by statutory vagueness Fs that aren't remedied by agency or court interpretation like CFA, safe banking, FARA, Article 1 court system, only Congress can promote, like the MBA courts after they just broke the drone courts, immigration courts, FISA courts, institutional design apps about bureaucratic organization like Maine East, or extraterritorial law apps like CFA, Peninsula ECS, funding, power of the purse is also a good F key warrant. The next argument was about academic debates. They obviously don't access internal link to this. If we're winning our precision offense in internal link turns most of their academic debate standard because it proves we access a much larger internal link to predictability, which is the only terminal impact why academic debates are good. The next argument was a finite number of advocates empirically disproven. The topic is massively outside bias. The court's counterpoint is not non-unique research because it only has to research on the affirmative compared to entire casings for new F. Reasonability, good is not good enough in the context of this. Good is not good enough in the context of this because it should be precision to internal link turns reasonability insofar as it determines that there's more predictable interpretation of the topic. But all the ground offense I did above proves they're not reasonable. Go to the AA counterpoint. Concede the permutation just to test the competition. Not going for a concede the permutation just to test the competition. CIL, the conditionality is good. Counter-interpret what we did in this round. First, negative flexibility. Topic is giant bidirectional and status quo is indefensible. We need more conditional obviously to compensate with reactive strategy. Second is processing. Multiple roles challenge. You have to make the tactical decisions about coverage. Our debate is good debate. Third is argument invasion. Debaters won't break new rules as a fallback option. Alternatives overburden the research. Cross-defy reasonability. Theory debates crowd of substance returns their offense and we're sick us with a counterpoint. They broke a new AF. No impact to strategy. Permits to choice and add-on check. The filibuster just said go to a concede. We'll concede Trump thumps. We're not going for it. Go to the please advantage. Util is good. Kahina all 18. You show up on moral intuitions and tendencies. You should not treat the pre-theoretical tendencies and all or nothing matter. Few or full-blown utilitarians, moral thinking, or approximate greater or lesser extent. Even when people endorse utilitarian principle judgments, we gotta pay down total consideration. Teach like a balancing philosophic accuracy and possibility. Utilitarians set up thoroughly impartial standpoint, axiomy to maximize well-being of all persons. The Judgment is in line with util does not show their judgments like the heart of the util outlook, nor does it show that will make a judgment in a way that resembles outlook another context assumption that utils like unitary phenomena that's fully uniquely reflected in pro-sacrifice response association between utility and judgments and anti-social traits considered about assumption. Whatever, it's fine. I'm good for Cossacks.
Yeah, okay. So I wanted to start by asking about your 1NC precision card that you said was a, quote, term of art. I'm just going to, like, read the entire card for you. But as I recall the word enact, this is a word of art. And if I recall correctly, enact means both House passes and the President sign. If that's the case, I would have no quarrel with your legislative veto provision. But I suspect that's not what's intended by this part of the bill. Is this like a joke or something?
It's interpreting the usage of the word enact in a statute and says it's a term of art indicating legislative action. I don't think it's a joke at all.
Yeah, but the end is just like, but I suspect that's not what's intended by this part of the bill. He's just like referring to something.
No, because the bill imprecisely used the word enact, which is why, the bill imprecisely used the word enact, which is why the judge is criticizing it. The judge is interpreting the usage of the word enact in that statute.
Okay, this right recutting is just like the court should treat it as a legislative enactment in this case. And at the bottom, he's also just like, a court rule has force of law. Why do you think this card is like neg?
The right evidence explicitly says that it's an unorthodox interpretation that courts can enact rules, and the other recuttings of California Supreme Court indicate that right is just flat out wrong altogether, because when they did interpret
Okay,
that
I'm not asking about the other California thing. I'm asking about this recutting. He's just like, in the context of rules, it is the exception. Like, why is this a neg card? That's our interpretation.
It's not a neg card. It just proves that you're imprecise insofar as like there's competing interpretations. It literally right cites in the middle card. Courts repeatedly interpreted an act to mean legislative, and it cites two other court cases, which just proves your own precision offense, because there's not a single true interpretation, which means it's questioned debatability. Yeah,
fair enough. I just was a little confused what your rules law distinction was. I heard that in the 2NC. I didn't like fully get.
Yeah, the piece of right evidence, the other right recutting at the bottom of the right counter block indicates that right conflates rules with laws by saying, because the original statute defines enactment of a state law, and right says, oh, like laws can be anything. They can be rules, they can be regulations, they can be a bunch of different things.
And what evidence do you have that says that's wrong?
Like the DSHA evidence right after says it is quasi-legislative authority, in fact, enact the law, i.e. rule of court. It's an invitation to error, which overlooks the fact the court does not enact law.
And like, what is what is the DSHA evidence basis for this claim? Like, it's a JD as well, so like,
it's a JD that was backed up by the Supreme Court of California, which is more authoritative than right for sure.
Like, what's the basis? Is there an argument for why like it's not legislative?
What do you mean by that?
Actually, that's fine. Util, how do we determine the well-being of a person?
We use it's consequentialist util, the arguments that we should identify in specific contexts as for the Kahane evidence instead of a universal frame of like an all or nothing manner.
Okay, and then just real quick, I wanted to clarify the voting issues were like plain text vagueness, af condo, right?
Yeah.
Is there anything else?
I mean, we extended like the aspect presumption argument that wasn't a voter.
Aspect presumption. Okay, cool. I think we're good.
One in our ascent, it'll be the advisor group's counterplan and then the second advantage. Alright. Just give me a thumbs up when everyone is good. Great. Advisor group's counterplan, the counterplan part of it conceded the perm just test the competition. The counterplan was not an agent, cannot change the process, but it's a reason to reject the argument. Now the team, now the 2AC functionally dropped a diss at 2. The F, the plan hammers judicial expansion to resolve core club, which shapes recovery to cover that outweighs hedge clubs, causes extinction, seeding the rest of China, and Bolton's rogue states, terrorist organizations, and necessitates allied proliferation to compensate subsequent instability against nuclear. That's brands that outweighs one skip, use hedges key to liberal international order. That's not paid for the control of 70 better use support for international order, encourage representative states to use zero BBs. Each stage in the middle of efforts to we see today for itself from the weekend court order 2 turns the case maintaining a quick and efficient court system key to maintain patent-based innovation, which is the internal link to both of their impacts. It's ball and kiss on ten relation between court system and investment strong for high potential human capital investment for suits impact for the fund behavior investment or any patent such as speed in the courts among the most valuable firms may hesitate to invest due products remain for some patent. So any delay in clearance myself the more quickly and cheap this resident from the more potential innovation. Now, first argument, court clog now is our argument. Judicial expansion is key to resolving a case is slow during the pandemic, but we're about to have an explosion in core business of operation during the nation's federal trial was not a part of the means the same data resources during the course of the trigger where matters to the course of an operating for deceased officials about the trials were postponed anticipated backlog arguments will follow the court 2AC2 the shift resources argument reject this argument. It's not carded with zero evidence on this even being possible, but it doesn't seem a lack of resources in the status quo in court PCs is key to allow them to shift those resources in the first place because they didn't have enough. Now I'll do the link debate here, but framing issue for it is they did not make a no link argument, which means you don't give it to the 1AR because the block was shaped off of 2AC slip-ups to multiple links. One is judicial time, the current agenda is pre-planned, and new rules trade off with other items on the digital conference agenda, which means all of their thumpers are priced in and accounted for. The app is totally unplanned, which is uniquely disruptive. The counterplan, the uniquely disruptive too is congressional backlash both from the substance and process of the rule and magnified by fiat since the plan short circuits the usual process. The unorthodox process outweighs the product, even if possible. Every time the rules are applied, it will generate controversy in congressional hearings in Congress. Ongoing friction hurts the judicial agenda broadly. That's easy. Rules of procedure are politicized. As John Johnson effectiveness of the judicial process, Congress depends ability to maintain universal procedure and politicized environment. The boring change is from the process of the judicial branch lobbying Congress and more congressional attention to in the current political climate. Unlike Congress, simply disregard the increased pressure regarding the federal procedural rules for the federal court. I don't need to read more links here because they didn't answer them. Now, the last thing they said, which is the only carded thing, was the no hedge impact. Yes, impact, but our evidence was about economic leadership, not military primacy. Not military necessarily. Economic leadership is a key internal link. Only economic privacy can solve and reducing economic distress is key. It increases the risk of conflict. The U.S. will feel compelled to flex military muscles to compensate for its loss from calculations reaching into American potentially incendiary combination. Now the advantage. No impact of war. Main said Far Cry. Multiple warrants. One, it's not existential. Research proves it only causes extinction at 12 degrees, but growth trends will only hit 6 degrees, and the probability of it it even gets as high as only 10%. 10% to intervening actors check. At worst, war heavily forces international bodies to act. Adaptation solves, but the plan's not key to it. I'm going to read some cards that were sent out in the 2NC doc. Our impact outweighs its cast 7 adaptations. Regardless of climate, what the 2050 economy will allocate the resources toward climate, not access toward capital distributed with the billions of deaths with other challenges connected to catastrophe attendant to invent a scenario, but specifically maybe becoming much more worse case scenarios for climate change unfolds over centuries more time for adaptation, economic present attack the red of the threat irrelevant. Now the innovation impact. There's innovation fails. Globalization means innovative tech developments diffuse rapidly to competitors, which adapt to neutralize tech advantages means we never generate edges over competition since they just get the tech we create. And innovation isn't an algorithm. Say this Polsky 18 has history is everyone is short instances, but I care to let them to be the systems of disregarding safety principles. So I don't read this expectation pendulum swung to the utopian algorithm say safety complex from the public that it is not appropriate to sort of all our clusters different departments request by official permission to be addressed. Machine learning is not magic, but innovation is resilient. That's at least has some of the stock market is told to different elements in economics technology revolution and industries blistering places to come to innovations the result of the new world and to use companies companies recommended a dominant global moments of the early 21st century I think of any major industries being set for the effective head of revolution. It's disrupting disciplines and models everywhere. Framing issue for this round is they conceded most of it. They said the only thing they read, the only defense they read, like carded, was impact defense. But the dissent turns the case anyway, which means only we have inroads to their offense, and they don't have any inroads to our offense.
Okay, we have 6:34. Top prep 255. I'll send it out. It's been sent, but for the sake of Wi-Fi, I'm gonna go downstairs for a minute. Now I'm playing it. Okay. Order is please DI T this side. Does everyone have the doc? Okay. I'm gonna start in about 10 or so seconds unless somebody verbally objects. Prosecutorial discretion and plea bargaining feels mass incarceration and militancy disproportionate along racial lines which kills thousands. Reject util if it justifies plea bargaining. What I see gotcha is contextual and says that it's mathematical whitewash that neglects racial violence under the guise of objectivity that conceals, justifies, and props up institutional racism which causes more deaths over time. Mass incarceration not declining enough in the partisan plea contextual. The DI advantage dynamic incorporation over federal procedure updates federalism and solves innovation and warming ways because you can't negotiate with the environment. A text subsumes their offense because it makes fighting easier. Only warming causes the distinction that's Gilson and 17 nuclear winter, non-low temperatures in the north allow humans to survive culture, adaptive conditions in the high valleys and elevated islands. Yes, warming, their evidence is bad and presumes actors intervene, which they don't. It causes extinction via wars and water scarcity, even if not by itself, but only we have IPCC data. Yes, innovation impact. It's not about beating other countries, rather how good regulated tech is necessary to stop every emerging threat. We can't get it from other countries. They haven't read evidence that we can. More development is better. T, counter-interpret tactics established by legal acts, which includes court enacted rules, resolve limits by excluding judicial rulings. That's right. Reform is reducing incarceration. That was UC Labartano, A-spec presumption. USFG is an actor, and we said that normal means is district courts. The plan isn't vague. That's arbitrary, non-resolutional, not AFCONDO, because we specified normal means. One is predictability. One is plain right size common understanding and literature consensus, which numerous court cases and government definitions comport with. Court enacted rules are unique legislative function, which they have Article 3 power to enact. Their evidence lacks intent to exclude rulemaking. That's a more evidence. USC Philo turns to evidence comparison. There has been ruled constitutionally void because it injects technical meaning to a common word, which is the basis for research. Right is app that was cross-exed in California. Recutting is a joke. It just says that the committee later had a different opinion. Also, not the only case right cites. The bottom three cards are awful. It just uses the word promulgate. True, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't have force of law. Danielson is not a term of art and is wrong, which was cross-exed and encompasses rules that Stein and 2021 of the plain meaning of an act is promulgated by law to make into rule and act to make into law. Enactment applies only to enactments related to ordination rules or legislation. They conflate substantive law with procedural law. It's party and 2K the legislature the power to enact substantive law, where the court has the power to enact procedural law. 2 is not contextual. The object of the residents enact CGR, not enact law, which their evidence arbitrarily assumes. That's an entirely different question. It includes courts. That's Northwestern. The law courts can enact reforms of security and 88 reforms enacted by the court and legislature will reduce the potential for reviews of post-trial hearing. 3 is framers intent. Drop the rest says USFG, not US Congress or enact by statute. The terms, limits, and ground counter trip only are often more limited, but more arbitrary proofs absent a predictable topic. Affidavit research is impossible. Even if right is a JD, he's referring to a host of federal and state Supreme Court cases. We referenced numerous other ones. Afghan is the next impacted outweighs key to innovation and fairness in these courts and executive counterplans unbeatable, which solves every act because it legally supersedes every actor. Also makes process counterplans competitive, which is impossible to generate sustainable solvency. FCC carries us as tiny and over limits the topic to unsustainable deficits that are solved by innovative counterplan. Ready, no link to limits or functional limits like the ruling counterplan. Court clog and picks are great options. We've lost 2 and there's few solvency advocates and acts as a bad limit because of court counterplan, non-use limits and research burden, but generics like the executive counterplan and abolition generation. The precision arguments are turned above reasonability, best block time allocation. The cult of limits means that the neg auto wins on offense. Defense, I would look for a marginally better interpret that exclusive app, which encourages goalpost shifting from substantive research. Arbitrariness is inevitable. We just need to interpret debatable. The app turns to absent innovation. We fall behind the military tech tape. No turns case patents isn't the internal to innovation. It's about about broader companies acting. They read cards that patents matter. Not that they're the only way. It's also not the internal link to warming because it's about encouraging states to adopt policies like carbon capture. The dissent was not an argument to begin with. So you get new 1ARs and their response to there are no link arguments. One, even if there is a link, there's no trade-off. If they care about getting more judges, it just means something else gets cut. They don't have any evidence. Their card is from 1998. It's their burden to provide that too. Is that the app does not cost PC. They've dropped 1 AC cards that say that the court has inherent authority independent from Congress in the area. So Congress does not get to influence it because it does not concern them. It's a pre-existing court-only power. Link 1 is nonsensical. Link 2 presumes REA. Congress has no authority over inherent authority. Johnson card isn't about politicizing the term of Congress. Isn't about politicizing the term of Congress. They've dropped the 1-2 AC argument. Courts are clogged all the time. There's no impact to court clog. Courts can just expand capacity. This called and 10 the problem of court clog whenever proposal to expand access to the courts has made the criticism is impractical. They fear that host of parties after clog courtesy argument is suffered defeating. The answer is not to exclude pendants. The answer is to expand the capacity of courts. He found to see the criticism as any distraction. No impact or link to court clog. Literally nothing happens. That's stern. And 3 judges expressed desire to avoid opening the floodgates of litigation given high case. So it's a fear is understandable. The fear of increased litigation, not valid judicial argument. The floodgates argument is inappropriate based on limitation found in the Constitution and proper role of the judiciary. 4 is no internal link. The internal does not give a time frame for when those issues need to be resolved. 5 way clog trades off with those issues in particular or what they even are. If they matter most are obviously priority. 5 is no impact. The card is highlighted horribly. It doesn't mention COVID recovery. It's about China getting ahead economically. Court case 7 is not the internal link to that. 6 is impact is about military, not economic primacy. 7 is no impact to hedge and Pierce that is not correlated with peace and interconnectedness and deterrence on the app solves court clock this regard. And 19. Before judges can accept pleas, they must already inquire to the merits, which are already accustomed to undertaking the examination of the merits. This problem can be circumvented by placing the length of time. The purpose is not to determine if there's no basis for adjusting the sentence to very greater duration. Our proposal will not result in significant time burden. The efficiencies would be undercut. The alternative is worse. This regard. And 19, the passive consideration, the discount time savings he set for wasted time and cost saving for 5 powerful arguments in favor of the discount. Having discounts enormous benefits for administration compared to the state of countries repeatedly discount on the benefits of the treasury price discounts to make the reason more comprehensible. We get all these arguments because they went 10 off, which is even Kondo doesn't justify that. It justifies this.
134 starting now. T. 5 cards. Oh, sorry. Cool. 2 narc cards sent. Okay, is anyone not ready? The next is question of your decision, which interpretation of the topic best aligns with the legal consensus and what constitutes an enactment. The only office extended in the 1AR is precision, which means if we win this question, then we automatically win the debate. But even if you conclude that the AF is marginally ahead on the precision debate, you can hang your hat on a vision of the topic that best preserves the ability for both the AF and the negative stance debates by allowing access to negative ground. The frame for the precision debate should be the inherently controversial nature of their argument. When you have to read 20 plus cards to decide the T violation at the end of the round, that is a clear sign that there is not a correct interpretation of enact. The fact that this is such a difficult debate to resolve proves that this is still a legal controversy with no definitive answer, which is warrant why should err towards a more debatable interpretation of that country. Now, the precision debate proper, well, we are more precise. There's multiple warrants. First, definitionally, there's a reason executive acts aren't topical, despite there being cards that say enacted via executive order, and there's a reason why they have two counter-interpretation cards that defer in plain meaning with a bunch of one-liner cards that say courts that enact in the same tenses that deter teams from going for T. They have read card 0 that is both authoritative and intends to prescribe a technical meaning to enact. Our evidence cites a vast array of authoritative sources with intent to define, whereas other cards are either singular lawyers or random court cases where these enact as a filler word for any other function as shown by most of the recuttings and the answers to the most contextual arguments. I'll answer the new 1AR evidence. The first piece of Harding evidence is not using enact in a technical sense, only to define the bounds of court's authority. Harding 2K, Article 5 says, where the Supreme Court has exclusive authority to adopt rules. In plain meaning stuff, I'll read a card for that. Plain meaning flows neg, Oxford 89, enact via of legislative authority to make into enact so the legislative matter. The Giardi evidence, they conflate the intent, no intent to define. It never says courts alone enact or form 2C or 1AR Giardi 88 modification to be made a common law rules court made it. A trial court should instruct jurors courts to adopt instructions reform punitive damages or enacted a statute which requires court to determine the amount. The only other time it uses enact in the article describes legislative action. Giardi 88 in criminal cases legislative enacted guidelines for sentencing. Which means you should extend most of our you should extend our interpretations of the word enact. We are outcarding them far more on this question. The pieces of evidence we read in the 2 and C are much more authoritative on this question. The piece of Cavallaro evidence is much better on this question. Indicates that in the context of the Rules Enabling Act, which is the statute that delegates the court's authority to enact rules, it uses the term prescribed. The piece of Ayers evidence clarifies that that is not an accident. The Congress explicitly uses the word enact for legislative action. Other terms like regulate and adopt for non-legislative actions. Congressional definitions are far more reasonable because courts interpret the statutes that Congress enacts, which means we have a much larger internal link to predictability. But more comparative evidence indicates that we're definitively right on this question. The piece of Noble evidence indicates that when in the context of separation of powers, that in the view of Article 3, that it's just a superfluous meaning of the word adopt because the legislator is one that enacts the changes to the rules, and it's not the courts. The piece of Stein evidence is comparative and says when Congress is involved, but the scholars use the term enact, whereas other piece of evidence, courts only promulgate those regulations. Definitional precision outweighs most of their contextual precision off because it's a larger internal link to predictability. No one reads these out for a reason. It's because the interpretation represents a niche concept which only their literature which is proven, but we also link to in the precision offense as for the extension of the Noble evidence, which is from the Mexico Supreme Court. That is an important distinction based on the separation of powers between the court's delegated ability to promulgate rules and Congress's ability to enact rules. The piece of McMurdy evidence we run in the 1 C says it's important to distinguish between courts adopting rules which are quasi-legislative and enacting rules, because any other interpretation renders the usage of their narrative to enact as superfluous, which links way harder to our limits in ground offense. Comparative evidence proves the distinction. Stein and Roth are both professors of law, and they make the contextual argument that I explained above. The Disha evidence is that JD as intends to define and exclude and says courts don't enact rules but adopt in the Supreme Court of California, which is a court case about the same law that their counter-interpretation evidence is defining for a paper concluded that it has to be the legislator. Now, and the right piece of right evidence is hot garbage, right? It's a JD candidate, which is obviously unpredictable and imprecise, but we've also mishandled most of the recuttings by just saying no, which is not a complete argument. The piece of recuttings we've read indicates that right conflates the terms of usage rules and law, and the Disha evidence clarifies that that is an incorrect interpretation. Jesus a JD, the Supreme Court of California interpreted the statute that right's enacting, but even then, right cites other neg court cases that refer to enact reporting of statutory law. Right's entire argument is a new interpretation of the word enact. Article 3 court power, the piece of evidence that indicates that it's delegated by the Rules Enabling Act, which we've read hyper-specific evidence that explicitly indicts that logic by saying Congress used the word prescribe, which means it's a most precise interpretation of that word. But rules, the next argument, I answered the right recuttings argument, the answer to the right recuttings. Their next argument was that Danielson evidence is not a term of art. They've just not answered the piece of Danielson evidence, which indicates it's a term of art with specific legal meaning when used in statutory language, that especially because the power is delegated by the Rules Enabling Act, it is not inherent within Article 3. You should read their evidence after the round. It best substantiate this. Framers' intent is not, our evidence is far more predictable. I'm not going for most of the ground stuff because we access a much larger internal link to predictability. It is time to draw a line somewhere, and I'm willing to go down for T and Act, even if it means ending my career on it, because this is frankly ridiculous. We are outcarding them like 20 to 10 on this question. Legal precision definitively outweighs even their other offense. Their framers' intent does not. It doesn't matter in this specific context because we're winning a much larger internal link to legal precision, which is the basis for all negative preparation as per their impact calculus that they did in the 2EC, which means they cannot go for any other arguments why it necessarily outweighs. Reasonability doesn't matter because precision turns it.
255. Tony, did you extend the reform definition?
No.
Okay. T. Do we have all the judges? Okay. T. I'll get started in about 5 seconds. Verbally object, not ready. Vote out for a vision of the topic that is both predictable and precise because it's the only one that speaks to coordinated rules and has an external background argument. An act means established by legal acts which includes coordinated rules but not judicial rulings. That's right, Moore and Afilo. 2 large points of offense outweighs the entirety of their offense. Even if they win the entirety of their precision impact, we have an external background argument which they don't really answer in the 2 and R. First is predictability. They have royally fucked this up. The 2NC spammed a bunch of court cases, but they have not answered the nexus question of why precision is better than plain meaning. The latter is still the most important internally to predictability, so they can win all of these cards are better, more legally precise, etc., and still not win. And I really don't want to hear a different RFT because the 2NC said nothing about this, Tony. You cannot auto win by reading 20 cards when you've not answered why predictability, why precision is better than plain meaning. First is plain meaning, and act according to common understanding and lit consensus only means to make into act and does not mean just Congress. Procedural rules by courts are explicitly included because they hold legislative power and make law under Article 3 for inherent rulemaking authority. None of their evidence is intended to exclude rulemaking, but instead judicial rulings. 2AC Philo is the kicker. It explicitly impact turns the 2 in which on against the right evidence and is the F comparison tiebreaker. Their interpretation of an act has time and time again been ruled constitutionally void because it injects a technical meaning to a common word as referenced by dictionaries as well as the general electorate to include rules, which is how we and every other reasonable person on this planet goes about prepping the topic instead of scouring the depths for every court decision about the world and act to exist because they're too lazy to write a couple extra negatives. The signed evidence corroborates this and says the plain meaning of an act means to promulgate laws and includes rules. This is explicit intent to define and include ordinances, rules, and regulations, which there's no answer to as per the 2NR. Their argument about plain, their Oxford redefinition is just the worst card I've ever seen. First, you should not give it to them because it's new in the 2NR, but second of all, it's just terrible. It just says includes legislative, but they've not answered the court fact that we are legislative. This is also just one dictionary, whereas our evidence cites a bunch of dictionaries, and you should read the Philo card after the round, and you cannot tell me you voted negative because this card is just quite possibly one of the best enact cards to be cut on the topic. Now, the Harding evidence recutting is bad. It says it does not apply. It still says it enacts substantive law in the context of rules, which is explicit intent to include that we enact substantive law. Their arguments about now I'll answer their arguments about REA prescribing. First of all, we're not the REA. Our argument is that courts have inherent rulemaking authority, and that rule is to make into law. Second of all, their cards are not as good as they're making it out to be. They've cut it well, but it just says that includes the word that the REA said prescribe, but not enact, but that does not really matter because their evidence does not have an intent to argue that these things are not legislative, as well as the fact that it does not say that we are not enactment, so you should prefer intent to include as well as plain meaning. The right JD evidence, this is a joke. This does not matter because he cites numerous court cases, governmental sources, etc. They've conceded that plain meaning matters the most. Second, res context. The res does not say enact a law, it says enact CJR. Not a single one of their cards say that courts cannot enact CJR, just that enacting a law is legislative. Northwestern law says that's a quote entirely different question. When enact is paired with something like CJR, it just means declare, which courts can do, which proves they're not predictable or precise because they don't use the resolutional phrase. The DRD evidence has intent to include is the contextual definition that says their forms were enacted by the courts as well as the legislators. So you should prefer how it is generally understood by the literature consensus. 3, favor and intent dropped in both the 2NC and the 2NR. They can win all their legal precision evidence, but they've conceded. The res says USFG for a reason and not US Congress should enact by statute. Court stops are included under every topic, so it's predictable for us to believe the courts were included under USFG. We've both agreed that precision and predictability matters to an extent, but you should not disregard our after-round arguments, especially because the 2NR says nothing about them. The after-round arguments, their topic is pseudo-ASPEC and is an external debatability argument. The topic might see an AF bias, but judges are overcorrecting, letting the neg fiat through every deficit, read process counterplays, etc. Only short court jurisdiction deficits gets back in the game. They've conceded terminally that the affirmative has essentially a 0% win rate, should set a super high threshold for you because there's no affirmative. They've conceded that there's no affirmative that can beat the court's counterplan, the executive counterplan, and the process counterplan because the courts legally supersede every actor and force compliance. Even if this is a ridiculous statement, the 2NR has no answer to it, which should set a very high threshold for precision outweighing because they've conceded it's all critical internally to competitive equity because it ensures any negative team beats every affirmative through an unbeatable agent counterplan in politics, which structurally skews the debate towards the negative. And even if the topic is imprecise, both sides still have a relatively equal chance of winning, and fairness matters most because debate is still a competitive activity. So, and it's still a game rather than just, oh, this is not law school, this is a game. So you should prefer debatability over precision. We've impact turned all the precision arguments above. I'm not going through every single one of their cards because it all has the same issues. Finally, I'll extend reasonability. Even if they win or are more precise, they don't have an argument for why our model of debate is untenable for the negative. So you should prefer our model to search for the most limiting topic causes substance crowd because teams are encouraged to go for T instead of substance. That creates a worse model of debate than the alternative. By just searching educational debates and creating a race to bottom, defense should be sufficient to win, which disproves arbitrariness. This argument is external to precision, just an argument for why if we win that our model debate is not impossible for the negative. You should prefer substance crowd out over nitpicks about legal definitions. Good debate.
Good debate.
Good debate.
I presume card done.
Good debate.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have everyone? Awesome. Well, congratulations to both teams for a fantastic and super close debate and for making it to semifinals of the TOC. You all should be incredibly proud of all of the work and effort that went into getting to this point. The decision is a 2-1 for the affirmative from Chaminade.
Yeah, so as tradition, I will go first since I sat. I think the big thing here is I'm just going to talk about plain meaning. The big thing that prevents me from feeling comfortable voting on the plain meaning distinction is that all of the comparison between technical interpretations and rulings and the kind of empirical use of the terms versus plain meaning, I don't think is fleshed out nearly enough or impacted out at all in the 1AR. The only push for me at plain meaning I have in the 1AR is the reading of the Stein evidence, but I'm missing the extension of things like the Philo evidence, impacting out what that comparison and why it's preferable. I compare this to the 2NR that answers the distinction by saying, A, judges should err on the side of debatability and predictability, which is not answered well in the 2AR or the 1AR. And B, why the AF cards are all one-line phrases that use the word filler. That's a fine characterization. While I agree that there are plain meanings that account for enact in the way that the AF wants to, I don't have an answer to the multiple indites of this logic, namely being that we should adhere to contextual use and historical examples rather than random words in the dictionary context, which I think the AF is ahead on in the neg, or that I think the neg is ahead on and the AF is not answering. I don't have a good answer to the right recutting. The 2AR just asserts that the recutting is bad but never cuts across the issue when I'm reading the recutting. I agree that right is using the term as an exception to the rule, which is also very much shuts down a lot of the kind of like plain meaning good description I'm getting from the negative and plays into the like legal use and historical examples should determine what you think is debatable and what you think is predictable. The 2AR has this argument about the neg definition being constitutionally void, but I think number one, there's no explanation of what this means or what those cases covered. Two, I'm listing a description of why this is more predictable or debatable in the context, which I think is bad because a lot of the 2AR seems to be missing the kind of impact calculus with what the 2NR was doing. I think this is especially true when that Philo card that discusses the constitutional canon says that legal thinkers generally use the word to run counter to courts enacting too, which I think plays into all of the kind of predictability and debatability stuff that they're going for that I think is dropped. All that being said, I think that the impact debating on both sides was pretty abysmal in both the 2AR and the 2NR and the 2AR, including like this like shotgun extension of reasonability in both the 1AR and the 2AR. I will keep it short. You all have a lot of debating left to do. If anyone has any questions, I'm right here and have an email.
I think I'll email. Oh wait, never mind. Everyone, sorry, I forgot there were two other decisions.
Yeah, like I mentioned before, this was a fantastic debate. It's one of the best debates I judged all year. The depth of clash, both sides' preparation, quality of arguments, and argumentative innovation displayed in this debate. Everything was really phenomenal, and it was a privilege to judge. I ended up voting affirmative because I think ultimately, at the end of the day, the 2NR is excellent about litigating the details of evidence, comparing, inserting recuttings, but ultimately there's just not a ton of comparative impact calculus done between the precision impact that you ultimately go for and either the affirmative's recharacterization of that impact for this predictability-based offense or the AF ground standard that they ultimately end up going for. I think much of the 2NR seems to presume that you're solely internal link turning the AF standard of precision, rather than grappling with this AF pivot that instructs me to prefer plain meaning over hyper-precise technical definitions when assessing the predictability of a definition, rather than all grouping it under the same predictability/precision argument. And B, this AF ground standard, which the 2AR correctly identifies doesn't get much airtime, if at all, in the 2NR. And so ultimately, the problem is the 2NR concedes precision outweighs, debatability doesn't matter all that much, and goes all in on precision without a terminal impact to that or a reason why debatability doesn't matter for the affirmative. I don't think the 2AR is necessarily great on the comparative impact calculus question either. You mostly frame it as a tiebreaker for the predictability debate with a small explanation of competitive equity embedded at the bottom. So that's how I ended up evaluating it, requiring the neg to win that their interpretation is significantly more predictable than the AF's, to win that differential in predictability outweighs the detrimental impacts of a Congress topic for AF ground. And so ultimately I concluded On the predictability debate, the asked interp was sufficiently predictable, largely due to the lack of a conclusive neg card on the question of whether the verb enact excludes rulemaking by the judiciary. I think you're reading a lot of great cards, generally defining enact, using it in context, citing it in legal proceedings, but without either an on-point response to the importance of definitions raised in the 1AR and 2AR with an intent to exclude, or a card that actually does so, it's difficult to win your more predictable to the extent needed to outweigh the AF ground standard. I'm happy to go into the details of how I decided, evaluated all the evidence, etc. But I'll also open it up to other judges or stop here because I know you may not want to listen to super long RFDs at this point.
I can go pretty quickly because I agree with pretty much everything Tyler said. I'll just basically add a comment to it because the resolution of the debate was essentially the same, although I won't go through the cards in close detail either. I will say the 2NR and 2AR in the debate, I mean, when it comes to argument instruction, obviously a very, very messy debate, but also just a messy area of the topic and a messy area of the literature base. Like people are throwing the terms around in all different places. So given that, I need instruction in the debate to tell me how to come down on these questions. I'm not a legal scholar. I'm not like a lawyer. I won't be able to resolve that on my own. And so left with a bunch of floating indites and prodites with limited judge instruction on how to resolve it becomes pretty difficult. I thought it was going to be debatability kind of breaking the tie for the negative. So when the 2NR overview happened, I was like, smart overview. Like you just need to win sufficient predictability. Obviously, these asks are very difficult to answer. There's no real AF-ground argument in truth. And so you're just going to be able to win a big risk of debatability, and it's going to filter how I view the precision debate as long as it's sufficiently precise. But then I don't know what happened. I think you get bogged down a little bit in the technicalities of the evidence comparison, which you do a good job of, but then by the end, it just means that you don't have that impact going for you. And so it becomes hard to decide the debate in that favor. And so when the 2AR is the only one that has, at least an attempt at comparative impact calculus, even if it's not great, I end up siding with that.
I think we'll email with questions if you want.
Us too.
Cool.
I'm kind of done thinking about this.
Oh, yeah. All right. Good luck, everyone. Get some sleep. GBN, good tournament.
Thank you all for judging.
Thank you.